rebel factions are advancing on the capital, Damascus. Qutaiba Idlbi is a senior fellow with the Atlantic Council's Rafik Hariri Center and Middle East programs, where he leads the council's work on Syria. And he joins me now. Qutaiba, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Of course, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We have these rebel forces that are closing in on various fronts into Damascus. There were even reports yesterday that one of the rebel factions, HCS, had made a deal with Syrian forces to withdraw peacefully. How soon do you think before Damascus actually falls?
So what we've seen today, actually just minutes before now, regime forces and government forces withdrawing from Homs city, the third largest city in Syria, and then the coalition of rebels with HTS have entered the city. I think as we move forward, we're probably looking at getting into Damascus Damascus fronts in the next 2 days. But it's very much expected that the last fight that the regime will hold is going to be in Damascus and around Damascus. As you've mentioned, we've definitely seen more green lights, as in terms of rebels moving across the map in Syria. But the main offensive that is happening is moving from central Syria south towards Damascus. Other efforts that we have seen are more part of a popular movement where locals have picked up arms and kicked out regime officials and officers out of their hometowns. But it's really hard to say that this is an effective control that is really pushing the regime out. I think we will have to wait and see the main force coming from the north taking over large parts of Damascus to really say that the regime is completely out of Damascus and other areas in the south.
I want to come back to the rebel advancement in just a moment, but first of all, I want to talk about Syria's usual regional traditional allies, Iran and Russia here. And both countries have told their nationals and their personnel in their embassies to leave Syria immediately. Is this a definitive sign of the end of the 54 rule of the Assad dynasty?
Well, a lot of Syrians hope so. I think on the Russian side, Russia might be a little bit comfortable as long as its bases, its naval and air bases in the Syrian coast in western Syria are not touched. So that is really probably where Russia draws the line. But Assad has been a very unhelpful partner to Russia throughout the last decade. Let's remember that Russia only intervened in Syria in 2015 after Iran's Qasem Soleimani traveled to Moscow and actually effectively asked Putin to really intervene in Syria. In the 4 years before then, even when the regime was really threatened, Russia did not really intervene in the war. Its intervention, in a sense, was really more about showing the United States and showing the international community that Russia is a global power that is capable of standing against US interests. Iran, however, on the other side, is a different story. I think Iran's capabilities, especially in Syria, has been harmed a lot since the beginning of the war in Lebanon. Israel, in that sense, have set up the conditions that really have weakened Iran and the Assad regime in Syria, whether it is the decay of Hezbollah and Iranian militias and assets across Syria and Lebanon, but also, in a sense, the siege that Israel has set in place, where it is preventing Iran from moving assets and military equipment across the borders into Syria. As we know, Israel has prevented Iran from landing airplanes that carry personnel or military equipment anywhere in Syria and Lebanon. And the land bridge that Iran used to operate through Iraq has been under direct threats by Israel and the United States to prevent movements of such equipment and personnel into Syria and eventually into Lebanon. And I think that's what has really put Assad in a very difficult situation in the last week.
Elsewhere, of course, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan had been under a lot of pressure in the last few years or so to address the influx of Syrian refugees into his country. He had also offered to try to resolve the hostilities within the civil war. Bashar al-Assad did not take up that offer. What role do you think Turkey plays in the current advancement of the rebels? And how do you think President Recep Erdogan will react?
So looking at Turkey's role, it's really hard to say that Turkey didn't play any role at all. I think Turkey has provided a yellow light where it didn't really say no to the rebels, but it didn't really effectively say yes. And also looking at the open source intelligence since last Wednesday, it's really hard to pinpoint any clear Turkish support for this operation. We haven't seen Turkish artillery or Turkish drones participating in the operation. We haven't seen Turkish equipment and vehicles being used by the rebels who were directly funded and operated by Turkey or by HTS. And we haven't seen really any advanced weaponry like anti-tank missiles and other weaponry that has been used on a large scale in any of the fronts. So in a sense, we don't really see an evidence where Turkey has really participated. And I think also looking at Turkish position, Turkey would have probably known that this operation is ongoing, didn't oppose to it in the last minute because of the frustration from Ankara for the lack of engagement from Assad's side. And I think for that reasons, and also because now this movement by the rebels is feeding on its own energy, as we've all seen, the regime, the government's army is leaving behind its equipment, its ammunition, its weapons. So this movement has been feeding on its own actually equipment and ammunition. But also we've seen a rise in the popular movement where a lot of local Syrians have actually been joining the fight. So the expectation originally in the first days of this operation that the rebels will stretch out, that they will have to stop somewhere, actually did not happen because a lot of fighters are joining in. And the rebels didn't really have to stretch themselves thin because of that feeding of fighters and ammunition left by the regime.
Right.
And that leads us actually to how much Turkey could have an influence. I think the problem facing Erdogan right now, I'm sure Ankara is very happy where the rebels are going, but it's really hard for Turkey to play a very effective role in stopping this operation if they want to, because they don't really have control over how much weapons the rebels are winning, and they don't have control over the pool of fighters that have joined the fight in the last week.